Hey. How's it going? Welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica. I'm Jessica. How's it going? So, I was not crazy. There was no day 7. Well, there was a day 7, but it was only a day 7 to let everybody know that Mr. Chandler tested positive for the COVID. So they were putting everybody on a quarantine and postponing trial for a few days. I'm not really sure how long they postponed it for because, of course, we're not watching this live. So, luckily for us, we don't have to postpone our watching activities. So, we just get to go right ahead and keep going. But yeah, that sucks. So I wonder if the whole take your mask off thing is going to keep being a thing. Hopefully, because still, he sat over there with his mask on the whole time and still somehow caught the vid. But I bet you that was. I wonder if he's in custody. I wonder if he was out on bond during this whole time. I don't really know. Um, but either way, so that is what happened to day 7. It was just the judge coming in and telling all the jurors that they weren't going to be needed for a little while, and then, we'll let you know when you can come back, type of thing. So we will move right along to day 8. So we get to skip a day. So really, this is only a 9-day long trial. So, yay! Okay, well, so anyway, a little bit more about just to catch up. This is Chandler Halderson trial. He is on trial for the murder of his mom and dad. He is also charged with the dismemberment of said mom and dad. He So far, they have shown some DNA evidence. They've put him at both scenes, or both, not necessarily crime scenes, but both areas of where they found parts of mom and dad. They've put them in the vicinities of where they have found mom and dad. They have found bone fragments of mom and dad, human bone fragments in the fireplace at the home, which would indicate, So that's kind of where we're at. But this is the start of trial day 8 with that. And again, I am Jessica. I am not an expert in any of this. I do not have a legal degree. I do not have a law degree. I do have a college degree in some things. I do have a criminal justice degree. I work in the mental health field. I mainly just like talking to myself and blabbering on about things and having some comments. I have opinions on things, and for some reason I feel like I should share them with the world. So yeah, that's where we are. That's why I'm doing this. So, feel free, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that, and let's get her going. Oh, we should probably do this first. Judge has a new mask after the break.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Okay.
The state would call its next witness, please.
State calls Jessica Crawford to the stand.
Good afternoon.
Hey,
If you're willing
Jessica.
and able to and feel you can safely and responsibly testify without a mask, that would be the preference if you can.
I can.
Thank you so much. If you would stand, my clerk will administer the oath.
Yes.
Well, nothing's changed as far as testifying without a
Good
mask.
afternoon. Could you please state your full name for
They
the
don't like
record
it.
and spell both your
They
first
don't
and
like
last?
testifying with masks,
Jessica Crawford.
which they shouldn't. Hey, girl.
JESSICACRWFORD. How are you employed?
I am a firearms and toolmark examiner with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, Milwaukee Laboratory.
And what do you do as a firearms and tool mark examiner?
We examine firearms and firearm-related evidence to determine if the fired evidence was fired either in the same firearm or a particular firearm.
And how long have you been employed with this crime lab?
As a firearms examiner,
Yes.
approximately 5 years.
And did you hold any positions before you were a firearms examiner?
Yes, I did.
And what were those positions?
I was a forensic program technician.
And
Bless you.
what is your educational background and specialized training that allows you to be a firearms examiner?
I have a Bachelor's of Science from Fort Hays State University. I have also trained in the Milwaukee Crime Lab Firearms and Toolmark Examiner Training Program. This is a modular apprenticeship training program.
Exhibit 403 and Exhibit 404. How would you identify Exhibit 403?
This is my statement of qualifications.
And that's what the crime lab uses instead of a curriculum vitae. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, I would move Exhibit 403 into evidence.
It is received.
And in this case, did you write a report?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I'm going to show you what is been marked as Exhibit 403.
Again, I can't get. Hold on.
Yes, this is.
I would move Exhibit 404 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
It is received.
So when you say you're a firearms examiner, what does that mean you actually do?
When we receive firearms or firearm-related evidence into the crime lab, we examine the firearms to ensure their functionality, make sure that they work as they are intended, and test fire those firearms. When we receive fired evidence, which would be things like cartridge cases and bullets, we examine that evidence for characteristics that are both the class characteristics and individual microscopic characteristics.
Ma'am, you
that
don't
would
need to be
allow
so
us to determine
scripted.
if they were fired in the same firearm or if they were fired in a particular firearm.
And what are you looking for when you're looking at, for example, a casing that was fired and comparing it to another casing fired
Why can't I
from
hear you?
a known weapon? What exactly are you looking for?
So we're looking at the markings that are left on the fired cartridge case from the firearm. We would be looking
You're so
at
quiet.
impressions or striations that are left by things like the breech face, the firing pin, the ejector, the extractor, the chamber. These are all areas that we would look at in order to determine if they were fired in the same firearm or from a particular firearm.
So does each firearm leave unique characteristics on a casing?
Yes, it does.
So you can match them up in theory. If you have the weapon and you have the casing that was shot from it, you should be able to match
Sort of.
Correct, you should be able to.
Okay. Did you examine any evidence in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And specifically, did you examine a firearm in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. The detective also is the firearm. I'm first going to show you that the box that the firearm was in. This is 291. It's now been put into a secure carton, but if you want to look at that, does this have markings from you or lab?
So when an item is accepted into the crime lab or submitted to the crime lab, we will give it its own unique crime lab number, and each item will receive its own unique crime lab identifier. So in this instance, there is a barcode label. That barcode label has the unique crime lab case number of M21.
I was thinking about shaving my head,
1575,
the side of it,
and this is item AL.
like that, but not like that short. Tried short hair. My face is too fat for short hair.
Ms. Crawford, is this a weapon that you fired in connection and marked AL?
Yes, it is.
And in this case, were you also given a casing to examine, specifically exhibit 284, casing found in the Halderson home and basement floor?
Yes, I was.
And so when you had the firearm and you were given this case, what did you do to examine those items?
So in the examination process, once again, I function tested firearm to make sure that it worked, that there was no damage, and that it could safely function. I functioned the safeties in order to make sure that they function as intended. And then I performed test fires of the firearm. I then took those test fired cartridge cases and I compared them microscopically on a tool we call the comparison microscope. A comparison microscope is a microscope that is two microscopes connected by one optical bridge. What this allows for me is that I can look at those two objects simultaneously. So that was performed in order to look at those individual markings that were left over from the firearm.
In this case, did you compare exhibit 284
This case.
to the test rounds that you fired from?
Ma'am, as a previous
what did you say,
big
AL?
Yes,
chested woman,
And what did
you
compare
cannot
your
wear
examining?
buttoned
I
shirts.
was able to determine that
such
this
as
test-fired
those.
cartridge, or this cartridge case was
They don't
fired
fit well.
in item AL.
And how did you come to that conclusion?
I came to that conclusion based on the
You're gonna
different
pop out.
microscopic markings that I was able to identify in the breech face, the firing pin, and the ejector.
And was this case peer reviewed and verified?
Yes, it was.
And what does that mean for your conclusion to be peer reviewed and verified?
Peer review
And now I
is
can
when
wear
a second
shirts that
qualified
button.
examiner takes the paperwork
It's fantastic.
and reviews it to determine that it is accurate and complete. And the verification is when a second qualified examiner takes the evidence, performs an examination, and confirms that my conclusions and the evidence are matching.
So to put it simply, a second pair of eyes looks at the data and the results and sees if they agree or not.
Yes, and the physical evidence itself.
And are all of your conclusions here today to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as practiced within your field?
Yes,
And is the lab that you work for, the Wisconsin Crime Lab, is it accredited?
yes, it is an accredited lab.
And what does that mean?
That means that a third party oversees our policies and procedures in order to ensure that we are meeting or exceeding industry standards.
Okay, nothing further.
Cross-examination.
None, thank you.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, and released.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God, they released her. Holy shit. See?
Next witness, please.
You're popping out of your shirt. I mean, at least, safety pin that shit. Come on now. Oh gosh.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good
If you believe you
afternoon.
can do so safely and responsibly, testifying without a mask would be our preference if you're comfortable with that. Thank you so much. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. Could you please state and spell your name?
Laura Matson, Laura-Matson.
And where are you employed?
The Wisconsin Department of Justice Crime Lab in Madison.
And what is your position at the Crime Lab?
I am an advanced latent print and footwear examiner.
How long have you been there?
I've been there since 2003.
Talk to me
Latent
about what you do
print
as a
and
latent print
footwear.
As a latent print
Examiner?
examiner, I examine items of evidence and
That's
process
not a
items of
real
evidence
thing.
for latent prints to determine if there are any suitable prints on an item of evidence. If there are suitable prints on those items, I will then compare them to any known standards. I can also utilize our state
Again.
and APHIS, state and FBI's automated fingerprint identification systems, a tech review and verify other examiners' work, as well as testify in court when needed. As an advanced analyst, I do more of the review process and writing of policies and procedures, as well as train new employees at the lab.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in criminal justice, and then I attended the Waukesha County Technical College Police Academy where I received
Waukesha.
my law enforcement certificate.
When it comes to
Sure.
latent prints, what specialized training do you have?
I had very little training as a law enforcement officer in latent prints. Most of the training was on site at the crime lab, which included trainings by both senior and advanced analysts, covering examinations, how to process items, how to do comparisons, and how to come to determinations of evaluation. It also included learning how to use our databases. And then I have also attended over approximately 300 hours of external training in latent prints.
Are you certified by the organization?
Yes, I'm certified in latent prints by the International Association for Identification.
What is a latent print?
A latent print is generally a hidden or unseen print on an item that you would normally have to physically or chemically process in order to see it.
What is a known print?
A known print is an intentional recording of a person's friction-ridged skin. Typically, you would see something like that on a fingerprint or a palm print card, an intentional recording.
We're going to talk about some latent print work, and you did in this case, correct?
Correct.
And in addition, we're going to talk about something, your work as a footwear examiner too, correct?
Correct.
Tell me about your work or what you do as a footwear examiner with the lab as well.
As a footwear examiner, similar to latent prints, I again will examine and process items of evidence for question impressions. I will analyze images of question impressions to determine if they are suitable for comparison. And if they are suitable for comparison, I can compare them to any submitted known footwear standards. I can also utilize our footwear database and our internal reference collections. And again, I will tech review, verify other examiners' reports, and testify in court.
Similar question to your fingerprints work. What specialized training do you have to do this footwear impression work?
My footwear training involved both internal and external training as well. Internally, again, by senior and advanced analysts, and externally by certified examiners. Again, it covered processing, examinations, comparison, and evaluation decisions. And in footwear, I have approximately 100 hours of external training in footwear examinations.
When it comes to both latent print analysis and footwear analysis, have you testified in court before?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 5 in footwear and about 38 or 39 in latent prints.
Sure. I'll show you a couple of exhibits. We'll start with exhibit number 426. What are we looking at there?
Exhibit number 426 is my statement of qualifications.
And this somewhat details what you just talked about, some of your training and experience in this area.
That's correct.
What are we looking at?
When you do latent print work or when you do footprint work, do you reduce your findings to a report?
Yes, I do.
And in this case, the case of Chandler Halderson or regarding the deceased individuals, regarding Krista Halderson, you wrote numerous reports in this case.
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked.
Sure.
Exhibit number 429, 430, 431, 432, 433, and 434. What I'm going to have you do is just page through those. And my question at the end is going to be, are these your reports in this case?
Okay.
Just let us know when you're done.
La la la. Hey, hey,
All uploaded in my
hey.
reports.
All right. In addition to your reports, there were a number of
Fantastic.
photographs taken at the lab, and all of those items have been transmitted to my office and to the parties involved, correct?
That's correct.
I'll move exhibits number 429 through 434 into evidence.
And 426?
Yes.
Any objection?
No objection.
426 and 429 through 434 are all received.
And rather than having to read every one of those reports sitting here, we've created a presentation detailing some of those reports, have we not?
Yes, we have.
All right, and as 428 is in fact the printout of that presentation.
Yes, it appears to be.
Fair.
Flipping through. Yes, it does.
And 427 is just labeled as an envelope of a USB drive containing that PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I'll move 427 and 428 in evidence.
No objection.
Those are received as well.
And if we could have the HDMI left put up.
What shows on the large screen should appear on the
Oh,
computer
there it
monitor
is.
for you.
Okay. Thank you.
So we'll start with 429, which is a report of August 17th, 2021. You examined some items in this case regarding some footwear analysis, correct?
That is correct.
What were those items?
I examined item C2 and item S, which were both tarps.
Sure. And I think the jury has seen in this giant box in a garbage can, we have item C2, which is a tarp, and item S, which we've been referring to as a barn. The barn tarp is in this giant bag right there. But for instance, if I bring you this item, are you able to take a peek at that item and let me know, for instance, is that item S?
Yes, it does have the crime lab identification of item S on it.
Got it. And that's exhibit 143. The crime lab uses its own identifying stickers on these items.
Correct.
All right. When you looked at these items, what were you looking for when you first saw them?
When I first examined them, I was in the presence of other analysts, and I was looking to see if there was any either footwear impressions or if there was any friction ridge detail, which is the detail that is on the palms of your hands or the bottoms of your feet.
At that time, did you have any shoes to compare it to, or were you just looking for if those prints were there?
I was just looking for impressions.
Sure. And you did some search for the designs of things you were finding.
That's correct.
Tell me about that.
So when there's a footwear impression, we have a database that we can use. It's called Soulmate FPX, is one of the many databases that we can use. So if we have a question impression, if you think of the bottom of your shoe, we call that the outsole, and there's going to be a pattern on the bottom of that shoe, and that's produced by the manufacturer, and it's going to be shared by multiple shoes. When we see an impression, there are details within that impression. You know, there may be a circle or there may be triangles, and the relationship of where those are in correlation to each other, we can use that information and search our databases to see if we can find a potential shoe that did make that impression.
What type of databases are we talking about?
So Soulmate FPX is a database that is made by Foster and Freeman, and they have worked with many manufacturers and have uploaded the images into this database where we can search them. We also have just reference collections that we've made internally from shoes that we have received either from crime scenes casework or either from building our own from other analysts at the lab.
Sure. Some people bring in old shoes and donate them.
Correct. And we also can reach out to other examiners throughout the states on a forum to see if anybody else has ever seen the shoe and has seen before.
Sure. So examining C2 and S, you saw some designs that you wanted to look into further.
That's correct.
And you've personally seen these tarps in these images, correct?
Yes, I did.
And so just briefly, if we look at C2, we've been talking about it, this large box right here. There was a tarp inside of that garbage can. This is different lighting conditions, correct?
That's correct.
And this is the tarp we're talking about that has some yellow duct tape on it.
Item C2, you did, yes.
Okay. And inside the garbage can, that's what the tarp removed, correct?
That's what it removed, yes.
Just a different view of that same tarp.
Correct.
Tell me how you find these prints. Do you literally just get on your hands and knees and look? Is there a special tool you use? How does one go about this?
This is a fairly large item, so it was a little more difficult to get to the center of it. So in this situation, we did open it up, and I was able to. The best way to sometimes see this is actually in darker, like when the room's dark versus when it's very bright. So we did dim the lights in the room, and I used what we have different. We have flashlights that have different wavelengths. So maybe a purple or maybe UV. So I utilized those flashlights to see if there was any footwear that was able to be seen using that different frequency of wavelength.
And you were able to see things.
Yes, I was.
Is this an example of what you saw in C2?
That's an example, yes.
So once you have, so perhaps this, recovered from C2, what you saw, and you then start looking to see if you can find that shoe.
In this situation, I finished my additional processing, and then once these images were taken, I analyzed the images and then used the information from the images to search the databases.
And were you able to find a shoe consistent with this print?
Yes, I was.
And was that at Brooks Launch 5?
That's correct, it was.
Now, these images are just commercially available images, right, of the Brooks shoe?
Yes, they are.
They're not specific to this case?
No.
Okay. Do sometimes you rely on those commercial images in your work?
Mostly we do. In general, when we are able to find a possible outsole that made that impression, we can use just an image search online to try to give the police an investigative lead on what the uppers of the shoe may actually look like.
Okay. And so then we're going to talk about the other item, the barn tarp. Item S, same procedure. You laid it out, looked, different lighting conditions.
That's correct.
And there you found an impression as well.
That's correct. That's a processed image, yes, or impression.
And there you did some different work in this case, I would imagine, with this impression. Was it the same database, or were you able to find this image a different way?
We utilized the same databases to find the images. This was, I believe, as a reference from the Soulmate database.
Understood. So at this stage, I imagine the police haven't brought you every shoe they collected in the investigation. They were waiting to see if you found something, and then you asked them, or how does that work?
I had not received any shoes at this time. I issued the reports with these findings of the images that you just saw as an investigative lead. And then from there, shoes were submitted to the lab.
So then we have another report, October 28th, exhibit 433. There, the police bring you some shoes that they found in the case.
Correct.
Showing you what's been marked in this case is exhibit number 359. It's been testified to be a pair of Brooks shoes, size 10.5. And we've heard about some DNA on it, but is that the item you labeled, or your lab's labeled AD, and then 81 and 82 for the two shoes?
Yes, it is.
When I say AD, Adam, David?
Correct.
Okay. So are these photographs of the actual shoes that you were provided from the Halderson house?
Yes, they are. These would be the bottoms of the shoe, the outsole design.
What do you do once you get a pair of shoes like this that appear to be possibly something that was on that tarp and you want to look at it and see if it matches? What's your process?
The first thing we do before I do any type of beyond my examination of just documenting the general condition of it is we always have it photographed so that we can have it photographed in the condition that it was received. Because the next thing that we do to help us in our comparisons is we will actually put a black powder residue, which is similar than what you probably see on crime scene shows where somebody powders for latent prints. We put that on the bottom of the shoe and we make a clear tape lift from the bottom of the shoe. So then we can actually use that as an overlay to compare it with the question impression. So before we do any of that powder, we make sure that we do have it documented with images first.
Sure. And so here we have what's labeled as a test impression.
Correct. So the image on the right where it says test impression, that would be where I made the powder tape lift. So it was a clear overlay.
And once you have that, you're able to look at some comparisons of the original shoe print you saw on the tarp in C2, and then the shoes that you got that were purportedly from the Halderson house. You're able to compare those images.
Correct. I'll compare the images to both the standard, the physical standard, as well as the images and the overlay test impression.
And is that what we're looking at there?
Correct. The image on the left is a close-up picture of the question impression, which CIMP1 is what we designated that impression to be. So C stands for the item. So it was TARP item C, and then IMP is for impression 1. So this was the first impression that I compared on this item. And then the image on the right is the test impression from the known left shoe.
What are you looking for when comparing these? What types of, I imagine you're looking for abnormalities or something that is just different in both images that you could compare.
So we're looking at both similarities and differences when we're doing the comparison. The first thing that I'm going to compare is when we're looking at this, we're going to look at the outsole design, and that's going to be your general overall pattern that's on the bottom of the shoe. So we'll be looking at, and you can see pretty clearly that the pattern at the bottom of the shoe is similar. If there was they were different, at this point, I could say that there is an exclusion. However, in this situation, I would go deeper and continue a back and forth comparison, also looking at the wear. In a previous image, you could see that a new shoe of a Launch 5 has, can't really point, but you can see where there's those square blocks, and they look like one solid large block. However, a new shoe, when you get a new Launch 5, they have 3 little dashes, kind of like when you go further down in the impression, there's 3 in a row, and some of them look like M's. So a new shoe would have that throughout the entire pattern. This shows that this area of the impression and this area of the shoe was actually worn in those areas. So those 3 hashes are kind of gone, and now they're one solid block. So that wear corresponds between CIMP1 and the wear that is shown on the bottom of the known shoe. So we'll start with looking at the wear. Then we'll also look at the design elements to make sure that they are also in the same size, they're in the same location, and they're in the same shape.
And in this case, were they of the same size, shape in general?
Yes.
And this may be an illustration of some of the defects that you were able to observe in both the item C2, the print you took off of it, and then the test impression from the shoes you were provided by the police?
Correct. So in order to make any identifications in a case, we need to have what are called randomly acquired characteristics. We call them RACs. RACs are going to be what randomly happens. It's to the bottom of your shoe or the outsole as a result of a random act. So normally your shoes are going to be nice and clean when you first buy them, but the minute you walk outside, there's a chance that you're going to step on a piece of glass and potentially cut one of these design elements, or you're going to have a stone get stuck or embedded in between the design elements. So we need those types of things in order to make an identification in footwear. And again, just like with the other things, you have to have everything in correspondence, including the size, the shape, and the location of these racks.
Based on all these comparisons, you've made a chart, essentially.
That's correct.
What are we looking at there? There's a lot of letters going on. Tell us what we're looking at.
So if you look at the first column on the left,
Letters.
IMP number, I kind of briefly explained before, and it was C2 IMP1. So again, it would be the impression would be C2, and then IMP1 is impression 1 from that item. And then it shows the comparison decisions for either item 81 or for item 82.
And maybe a more visually pleasing way to do this is you had some findings at the end that described what you found.
Correct.
All right. So let's talk about item 81, which again, we're talking about these shoes that were provided to you by the police from the Halderson house. Were you able to determine the left shoe here? How did it relate to the print that you identified on that tarp in the garbage can as C2, impression 1?
So for C2 IMP1, I identify the left shoe to have made that impression.
You identified it to have made that impression.
Yes.
Okay. What about IMP2?
So for C2 IMP2, I again identify the left shoe to have made that impression.
What about the third impression, IMP3 on the tarp in the garbage can?
C2 IMP3, I concluded a high degree of association between the shoe, the known shoe, and the question impression.
And the fourth on the tarp inside the garbage can, C2 IMP4. What was your finding regarding that?
In C2 IMP4, I concluded there was an association of class characteristics.
Now, in addition to, we talked a little bit about your qualifications. You did some fingerprint work in this case, in addition to that, the work with the shoes, correct?
Correct.
And you wrote a report labeled, in this case, is exhibit number 430. You examined quite a few items here.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
Let's stop.
Talk to me a little bit about
Stop messing
fingerprints.
around.
Does every item that's touched by the bare human hand retain fingerprints the same way and the same quality?
No, they do not.
No.
What types of things weigh into whether fingerprints are able to be recovered in a quality fashion from an item?
There are a lot of things that can determine whether or not you leave prints behind. It's really a chance. We always consider it as a chance that you're going to leave prints behind. You know, you touch an item several times throughout the day, but you probably don't even notice your fingerprints on that item all the time either. It could be the condition of the item. It could be the temperature. It could be how much you're potentially sweating or how dry your hands are at the time that you touch an item.
In general, what types of surfaces retain fingerprints well?
In general,
Your
it's
phone.
easier to leave prints on smoother surfaces. It's more difficult to leave prints on textured surfaces.
So when we look at, for instance, in this report,
Bones, glass.
the vast majority of, in the right column, is no suitable fingerprints found, essentially.
That's correct.
But there's one that's bolded there, item C2A, which is labeled piece of yellow tape removed from item C2.
Yes.
And that was, in fact, a piece of yellow duct tape removed from that tarp that was in the garbage can.
That's correct.
You were able to identify a print there.
Yes, I was.
Is that maybe a view of that print?
Yes, as an overall view of the print.
When you got this print, you saw it, were you able to immediately make any identifications, or did you need further fingerprints from the police?
I was not able to make any identifications initially.
So you asked them for essentially better fingerprints, clearly finger rolled or rolled fingerprints from Mr. Halderson.
That's correct.
And were you provided those?
Yes, I was.
Then you wrote another report, exhibit 432. Did they provide you this item, AF?
Yes, I did.
And that's labeled in our case, exhibit number 362. Are those rolled fingerprints?
Yes, there's approximately 9 or 10 pages in there. Yes.
What is different about these fingerprints than the ones that were initially provided to you?
So the first set of fingerprints that I received were from just a regular 10 print card, which you normally would see somebody had their prints taken on. However, it's more difficult to get all of the areas of your print on one of those small little squares on a fingerprint card. So after my initial comparisons, I requested additional standards so that somebody would be willing or able to take tape lifts or rolled prints that include like the tips and the sides and all areas of the palms, so that I could compare all areas of his fingers and palms to make the comparison.
And at that point, you at least what you knew, you only had one item you were going to compare it to, which is the only item that you were able to find a recoverable print on, which was the duct tape, the piece of yellow duct tape that was on the tarp in item C2.
That's correct.
And then when they sent them to you, they also sent you an axe just to see if you'd be able to find fingerprints on it,
Yes,
and you were not.
I was not.
Did you do a comparison between the impression from Mr. Chandler Halderson and the print that you recovered from the duct tape on the tarp?
Yes, I did.
And what are we looking at there?
So the image on the left is, again, the latent print that was on the duct tape. And the impression number is, again, C2A. That's the item it came from. FRD stands for friction ridge detail, number 1. So this is the first print on item C2A. So that is the impression photographed with the duct tape that was on the duct tape. The image on the right is the overall print from the standard that was submitted on the last, was it item AF?
Yes.
So that was what the prints looked like when it came to me. And then the smaller image is the area that I ended up focusing on in order to make an identification.
What are you looking for when you focus on an area like this?
So everybody has friction ridge detail on the palms of your hands and on the bottoms of your feet. You have what's called friction ridge skin. This friction ridge skin is different than the skin that you're going to find anywhere else on the rest of your body because it has raised ridges on them. And those raised ridges, when you look at them, may look like just fine lines, but under magnification, you'll actually see that these ridges have unique characteristics to them and features called minutia points. And those minutia points are where a ridge may abruptly stop and its ridge ending. It may be where a ridge, one single ridge splits into two, looking like a Y, which we call a bifurcation. So everybody has those types of features within their friction-rich skin, but where they are in relationship to each other is what makes them more different and unique to each individual.
Individuals, all of us have unique fingerprints.
Correct. So when I begin looking at these, looking at this, I'll do an analysis of the question, impression, or the friction-rich detail first, and I'm going to make note of those unique features in the print. And then when I have a known standard that I need to compare it to,
Okay, I get
then
it.
looking again,
Now,
going back
do they
to
match
those
or do they
features
not?
that I marked,
That
and I
is
find
what
a
I would
target
like to
group.
know.
So I'm going to look for a grouping of maybe 3 to 4 areas of friction, or sorry,
Wait,
of
it's
those
got
unique features, the
It's
minutia
got to
points.
turn
And I'm going to
down.
go into the known standards, and I'm going to look to see if I can find a same grouping that corresponds. If there's correspondence, I will continue to go back and forth until there's enough
Very
sufficient
bright on
data
my
and
eyeballs.
to either identify or exclude.
You're looking for a lot of these different pieces of data as you do this, right?
Correct.
In fact, this is, in this case,
Correct.
some of those comparisons you did.
This is the information data within
Correct.
that I use to support the conclusion of an identification.
And all those little dots, what do those represent?
So those dots are going to be those minutia points that I mentioned before. So the dots, if you can see clearly, may show where a ridge ends or where it may connect with another. So where one ridge becomes two. There might be a couple dots in there as well. The circles in there where you can see with an item where I have marked A or D or F, those are going to be target groups. So when I start my comparison, I'm going to choose one of those and look for that kind of target group, and then I'm going to see if I can find those corresponding target groups in the known standard on the right, and you can see how they correspond between the two.
So were you able to draw a conclusion then from the print that you recovered on the tarp that's in the garbage can, item C2A, and then the piece of duct tape, which is FRD1, to the left ring finger of Mr. Chandler Halderson? Were you able to draw any conclusions?
Yes, I identified the left ring finger of Chandler Halderson to that impression from friction ridge detail.
No further questions?
On what?
Cross-examination.
Jesus Christ.
So I want to draw your attention to that first report, and that I believe was just
All of
originally
that, see,
taking
and I
tarps and
missed.
seeing if you could find any kind of latent prints, correct?
For the latent print one or the footwear one?
The footwear one.
Okay.
And you did both tarps, correct?
Yes, I did.
And I think we've identified the one in the garbage bag or garbage bin as a C2 one, and then the other one is the barn tarp is what we've been calling it. Yes. So for the tarp, the C2 tarp, that was where you identified those Brooks Launch 5 shoes, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And the other tarp, the barn tarp, there was another pair of shoes that you identified there, correct?
So calling it
Yes.
a barn
I
tarp.
wouldn't say identified, found and investigated a lead of a possible type of shoe that made that.
Perfect, thank you. So that's basically saying that the tread mark matches this particular type of shoe,
Or a shoe similar.
shoe
Yes.
similar to it. And what exactly is that shoe, if you don't mind reminding us what that shoe?
Can I refer to my notes for
Go
it?
for it.
Okay, so the impression on item S, I was able to locate a possible outsole bottom of the shoe that matched from a Polo Ralph Lauren.
And you're not able to identify the shoe size at this point.
No,
So later, when you did that supplemental report with the shoes that were provided to you from law enforcement, I believe you mentioned that those were the only shoes that were provided to you. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yes, they were.
So you were never provided any type of Ralph Lauren shoes.
No, I was not.
Now, as far as the prints that you found on the duct tape, where on the duct tape were those prints located? On the sticky side or the outside non-sticky side?
On the non-sticky side, on the yellow portion of it.
And were you able to identify any other type of prints, or was that the only print that you were able to look at and say, ah, yes, this is a fingerprint?
That was the only one.
Were there
I
smudges
guess
or
this
anything
is
else like that?
fingerprint.
None that I noted, no.
And as far as the fingerprints and the shoe prints go, we don't know how it is that those fingerprints or shoe prints got on these objects, other than at some point someone touched them. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Now, when you were talking about, bringing you back to the footprints real quick, when you were talking about first laying out the tarps and trying to identify if there even were any footprints there, You mentioned something about using different types of light sources to get that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
At any point, did you use luminol to try to get or to try to see footprints?
No, I did not.
So to kind of put my head around it, if you will, if I just step on a surface, regardless of whether there's anything on my shoe, it's possible for me to leave a footprint.
That's correct, yes.
And again, you can't tell when exactly that shoe print was made, other than at some point I stepped there.
That's correct, yes.
So he could have stepped on that any time between the time that he bought it
May this witness
that
speak
same
to the
day
Yes.
and when he wrapped up his mom and dad in it.
Oh, wait.
We'll get those to the clerk. Thank you very
All
much.
his mom and dad's body parts. It was a dumb argument. That was a stupid argument. I hope you feel stupid for the things that you just said. I do hope you feel stupid. I wonder if they do.
Good afternoon.
I bet you they
If
don't.
you believe you can do so safely and responsibly, testifying without your mask would be our preference, unless you're not comfortable and able to do that.
I would prefer to leave my mask on.
All right.
Of
Please proceed.
course you would.
Please state and spell your name for us.
My name is Megan McMahon. My first name is Meghann. My last name is McMahon.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm employed by the State Crime Lab in Milwaukee as a trace evidence examiner.
And while I talk, if we could have the
Sure.
screen on, and I'll have you pull that microphone just up as close as you can to you by the base. It slides. What is trace evidence?
Trace evidence is the comparison and identification of fibers, glass, fire debris analysis, and it also includes physical fit analysis.
Tell me a little bit about your educational background and your qualifications to perform this type of work.
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Spanish from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I have a Master's of Science in Forensic Science from John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
Internally at the crime lab or in your work as a trace evidence technician, what types of trainings did you undergo, or what have you done in order to learn this skill set?
To perform physical fit analysis, I completed a training program at the laboratory that included readings, hands-on exercises, mock casework, and it culminated in a competency exam.
And how long have you been doing this work?
I have been doing physical fit analysis for approximately 3.5 years.
I'm going to show you a couple things and see if you can identify them. I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 419. What is that?
Exhibit 419 is a copy of my statement of qualifications.
And is that accurately describe your qualifications and educational background?
Yes.
I'll move 419 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
Were you involved in a case involving Mr. Chandler Halderson and the deceased individuals, Krista and Bart Halderson?
Yes.
And you wrote numerous reports in this case.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you a few documents, and the question at the end will be, are these the reports you wrote in this case? So I'm showing you, it's been marked as exhibit number 422, 423, 424, and 425. Are these the reports you wrote in this case?
Probably.
Yes. Exhibit 422 is a copy of a report from August 16th, 2021. Exhibit 423 is a copy of a report that I wrote on October 7th, 2021. And Exhibit 424 is a copy of a report that I also wrote on October 7th, 2021.
And what is exhibit number 425, if you could?
Exhibit 425 are copies of the photographs that are associated with the analyses that I did with
That are
the
done.
reports that I authored for this case.
Understood. So I will take these, and Judge, at this time, I will move exhibits 422, 423, 424, 425 into evidence.
No objection.
They are received.
And rather than reading those off, a presentation has been put together in order to display some of your photographs and your reports in this case, correct?
Yes.
And you've had an opportunity to look at that?
Yes.
And does that exhibit, is that labeled 421? Does that appear to be that presentation?
Sure. Whatever you say. Ba, ba, da, 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 da. Ba, ba, da, da, da.
Yes, it does.
And so I'll represent to everyone that 420 is the USB drive containing the report, but I'll move 420 and 421 in evidence.
They are received.
So we talked about your education qualifications, and we talked about trace evidence testing. You used the term physical fit analysis.
Yes.
Just a little bit, if you could, tell us how you go about performing a physical fit analysis, and if you want to use an example of a stick broken in half, what are you doing? What are you looking at?
So with physical fit analysis, what I'm doing is I'm examining broken pieces of evidence to determine if the broken ends could fit together.
I'm
if
broken.
the pieces of evidence were once joined. In layman's terms, it's sort of like a forensic jigsaw puzzle.
And you performed that analysis in several items related to this case, the State versus Chandler Halderson.
Yes.
Let's talk about starting with your August 16, 2021 report. You, in that case, or in this report, you reviewed two separate items. One, a piece of black rope recovered from the Halderson residence, and one piece of rope recovered from the torso of Mr. Halderson.
Correct.
We have some photographs just to demonstrate what you were looking at. This is one of those items. Is this one of those items?
Yes, it is.
And another photograph detailing perhaps the other one.
Correct.
Okay. One side's taped. Can you tell us why?
The side that was taped was marked non-evidence end, and that is just to indicate to me as an analyst that it was cut by the submitting agency.
Rather than bringing the whole rope, they cut off the segment they want you to look at and take that.
Yes.
You performed some analysis there. Tell me what your findings were.
So I examined both pieces of rope, and when I'm doing a physical fit analysis, what I'm looking for is enough detail in the broken ends to be able to see if they could fit together. In this case, I was unable to perform a physical fit analysis because there wasn't enough detail in the cut ends to determine if the pieces of rope could have fit together.
Sure. You took some photographs of that.
The imaging unit took some photographs of it.
And that's a separate unit that's the part you work in.
Correct.
And is that a photograph of those two ends?
Yes.
And so while they might visually appear to be the same color and there's a couple different strands there, you're saying in your profession you're not comfortable making any conclusions related to that.
I wasn't able to perform physical fit analysis on these items.
Now we're going to look at exhibit number 423, a different report. This one of October 7th. You issued a couple of reports on October 7th, but this is the first one. You examined some different items here. Here you had some yellow duct tape that was recovered from inside of a garbage bin, I think labeled item C by the lab, and there was item C1 and C2 inside of it, but a garbage can. There was some duct tape stuck inside of it.
Yes.
And then you had a long piece of yellow duct tape, medium piece of yellow duct tape, a short piece of yellow duct tape, item CA, C2B, and C2C. Where were those items recovered from?
Those items were recovered from item C2, which was a tarp.
Those were the pieces of yellow duct tape. On the tarp.
Good Lord.
We had an item called item H. Item H is labeled as a roll of yellow duct tape. And that was an actual roll of duct tape.
Yes.
Now, showing you what's been marked in this case is exhibit number 283. Is that roll of duct tape that you were able to look at?
Yes,
And does that have your lab sticker on it?
yes, and my initials are on the CF.
I wonder if anybody's ever just said nope.
So when you had all of these pieces of duct tape, what was your thought process, or what were you trying to look for there?
So what I was looking at was general physical characteristics, so the color, the width of the duct tape, and then I was looking at the torn edges of each of the pieces of duct tape, as well as the edge that was attached to the roll, to determine if there were any physical fits.
Nope, I've never seen this
between any of the pieces
before.
of duct tape or any of the pieces back to the roll.
And we have some photographs of the items. I think the jury has seen this image, exhibit 58, which already been shown to the jury, but that's the tarp inside of the garbage can out on Irwin Road. Is that piece of duct tape that was inside of that garbage bin?
Yes,
In the next image, is that the tarp laid out with the pieces of duct tape visible on it?
yes,
Jesus Christ. If I could just
And,
sit still.
next slide, is that a closer up of one of those pieces?
Can't.
yes,
Same with the next slide, just another closer up.
yes.
Closer up.
You removed those pieces from the tarp? Or someone did?
Somebody at the laboratory did. I did not.
Were they laid out for you for inspection?
They were previously analyzed and sent to me after the previous analyst was done with their analysis.
Things like fingerprints had to be done first.
Fingerprints would have to be done before physical fit analysis, yes.
Okay, so let's look at a couple of these pieces. C1A, one of the pieces, that's a photograph taken by the lab.
Yes,
C2A, another photograph of the other piece.
yes,
C2B, just another piece.
correct.
C2C.
Couldn't get fingerprints off the duct tape.
Now let's talk about item, I
What's
think,
duct
H,
tape
the roll
on?
of duct tape that you were provided.
Yes,
Couldn't get any DNA off the duct tape.
Number 259, image of the roll of duct tape at the Halderson home. The police provided you that, and you took our photographs were taken of that by the lab. Here, now it's labeled, of course, item H.
yes,
You performed some analysis?
yes.
Tell me what you did and what you found.
So I looked at the
Easy
items
as 1,
visually
2,
microscopically. I was able to connect or to determine that physical fits were present between items H, which is the roll of duct tape, item C2A, which is one of the pieces of duct tape that was on the tarp. I was able to determine that item C2A, one of the pieces of the tarp, also fit to item C2C, which was found on the tarp. And then item C2C found on the tarp, the other end physically fit to item C1A, which is the piece of duct tape from the garbage bin.
So while you just said a lot of letters
So
and
all
numbers,
of the
what that
pieces
meant was that the roll of
fit.
duct tape that we saw pictured in the exhibit found at the Halderson home connected in one continuous line with all the pieces of duct tape that were found either in the garbage can or on the tarp that was
Very
found,
good,
in item C.
James Gordon.
The roll of duct tape physically fit back to one of the pieces on the tarp, and yes, that those other pieces also physically fit to each other as well.
And thankfully, the lab took some photographs of this.
Yes,
Okay, so there's the fit between C2A and C2C.
C2A and C, C2C and C1A.
Okay.
Yes,
And then C2A and C2C, that one's connected as well.
yes,
And you were able to determine that was, in fact, a physical fit.
This is
Yes.
somebody's job.
And then C2A and H being the roll of duct tape.
yes,
And you were able to determine that was a physical fit.
yes.
When you determine this, are you looking at it just with the naked eye? Are you looking at it
Like
closer? What are you doing?
I could probably do this.
So my first step in examination is to visually look at it.
Like, what
Again,
kind of
looking
degree
for,
did she say she
sort
had?
of
Because I
general
could
class
probably do
characteristics,
this.
so the width of the duct.
This is like a
tape.
like,
Then I'll use a
does
microscope
this
to
fit?
examine
my
the
8-year-old could probably
evidence
do it.
in a little more detail, to look closer at the broken edges, to determine again if the broken edges could physically fit back together.
And in this case, this is what we talked about, that one continuous piece of tape.
Yes,
And is it your opinion that item H fits into C2A, which fits into item C2C?
yes,
Jesus Christ. We're gonna go all over this
Let's talk about
just
another
to
report,
say.
exhibit number 424.
So all
Here
of
you
this
examined
was found
a
here
couple of
and did
different items,
this.
one being a broken saw
Over
blade
their
and one
questions.
a bow saw frame.
yes.
Any questions from the defense? No, Your
I'll show you
Honor.
what's been marked in this case.
We have nothing.
Is exhibit number 141. Is that the broken saw blade that you examined?
Yes,
And it's sealed, correct?
yes.
Does it go to the saw blade you found in the house? I bet you it does.
I'm going to show you what's been marked in this case, exhibit number 226. We don't have to open it, but is this the bow saw frame labeled item AG that you examined?
Yes.
One broken saw blade from AG, one sealed cardboard box containing one
For everyone's
paper
benefit,
bag.
I'm including exhibit number 113, showing
Can't
the
read
saw
that
blade.
fast, y'all.
showing
I'm
the
not a
receiving
good
evidence,
reader.
Exhibit 224.
I'll read
showing
good, y'all.
bow saw frame found at the Irwin Road property, or excuse me, found at Oak Springs. The lab photographed that broken saw blade,
Yes.
and this is that photo.
Yes.
The blade was broken at one end,
Yes.
and is that a close-up of the broken end?
It is.
Now, the bow saw frame, did it have a piece of metal that appeared to be a broken end of a saw blade?
It did.
She's
Is that
gonna
what we're
say
looking
it's
at in this slide?
inconclusive. I can't tell.
Yes.
And is that item perhaps a bit closer up?
Yes.
Okay. So you then,
Swear to
having
God,
all of
she
these
says
items, you
that.
perform some analysis on the very tip of a blade
Just
that was
the
left on the
tip.
bow saw frame that was at the Halderson house. You looked to see if it matched the saw blade that was found out at the Irwin Road farm. You
Did
looked to
this
see if those
puzzle
were a
piece
physical
fit
fit.
that puzzle piece?
Yes.
And what was your analysis?
So again, I looked at the items visually. I looked at the broken ends. Then I used a microscope, and I was able to determine that there was a physical fit between the saw blade and the small piece of blade that was removed from the saw frame.
And photographs were taken of this.
Yes.
What are we looking at there?
So that's the
Oh my God,
the
it
small piece on
matches.
the left-hand side is from the frame, and then the end
Surprise.
of the blade, and that's the
Surprise.
physical fit that you can.
Are
that
you
I
guys
determined
surprised?
existed between both
I'm
items.
not surprised.
Is that another closer up view, but maybe a different angle of that same thing?
Yes.
And what are we seeing there that we maybe couldn't see in the prior photograph?
So with
It's angled.
this item, it appeared that when it broke, it bent before it broke. So this is just a sort of like a 3D physical.
Don't bend, don't break, babe.
There we're
Don't
looking at just a
back
different angle of the same
down.
fit.
Yes.
And there as well.
Yes.
Based on looking at that item, you're comfortable saying, though, that those two items are in fact the physical fit?
Yes.
No further questions?
Cross-examination.
No, thank you.
May this witness be excused and released.
Jesus fuck.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
If you have any exhibits, go right ahead and have a good rest of your day.
Oh my God. Shush it. Shush it. On to the next one, which is day 8. I don't know which one it is. Which one did we just watch? Megan. Didn't know. I can't see what you're telling me. Okay. That's what I got. Right? Oh, yeah. I did, but it's this one. Somebody said. I have to move my microphone again. I don't know. I kind of like it here.
Seated, everyone.
Sort of, kind of.
Good morning, folks. It's
Good
Good to see
morning.
you again, and thank you very much for being here promptly. I have the permission of juror number 7 to let you know why he's not with us. He contacted us yesterday. When we excused the jury on Wednesday, rather than using the rapid test we provided to him, he went and had a PCR test done, the more formal test, and it was negative. And I wanted to make sure you knew that. He then subsequently developed some symptoms that caused him to use the home test. And this was a number of days later, but closer to today. And that came back positive. And so he informed me of that, and I excused him immediately, of course, because we can't wait another segment of days, and we have alternates for that reason. So I wanted you to know both the circumstances of his developing symptoms well after we were all together.
Postpone the trial
test result
for
on the rapid kit
dipshit over there. But not the juror.
Wednesday of last week.
Rude.
2 days prior.
Just kidding.
We're here today to resume, but I need to do a little bit more
Or juror
with you,
7.
Than the simple overnight or lunch break discussion, obviously, because it's been a number of days. And I wanted to make sure that we covered all of the bases so that the record demonstrates everything that did or didn't occur. What I'd like to ask you to do for each of these questions is raise your hand if you need to respond to the question. I'm not going to ask any follow-up questions here with everyone else, but once we've gone through these, then we
Maybe
resume
this
an
one
individual
should have came
process as we
before the
did
last
in
one.
choosing you for the jury so that we can discuss things. That way, anything you might say doesn't,
I don't know.
We're
Might
going to
have
proceed
went out
today
of
with
order.
the state's case, and I'll ask the state to call its witness, please.
The state's going to call Dr. Rogalska to the stand.
And
Regalska.
Doctor, I have asked every witness if they're able to safely and responsibly testify without a
She's
mask.
gonna say
to
no.
do so, I think you're in a position where you believe you need to wear your mask. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And as long as
Oh.
you're close to the microphone so we can all hear your voice.
See, this
that will
is
be
the
adequate.
thing that
I'll ask you to
irritates the
please
hell out of
stand,
me
and my
is
clerk will administer
medical
the oath.
people that think that they need to wear their
You
mask.
solemnly swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Good morning. Could you please state both your first and last name and spell both for the record?
Yes. Good morning. My name is Agnieszka Rogalska. That's spelled A, G as in Gregory, N as in Nancy, I, E as in Ernest, S as in Sam, Z as in Zebra, K as in Catherine, A as in Apple. Last name Rogalska, R, O, G as in Gregory, A, L, S as in Sam, K as in Catherine, A as in Apple.
That
How
was
are you?
ridiculous.
I am the Chief Examiner of Dane County.
Exhibit 367. Outside of your recent promotion, does Exhibit 367 appear to be a true and accurate copy of your curriculum vitae or CD?
It does.
I would move Exhibit 367 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
It is received.
And Doctor, I just briefly want to go through some of your educational and work background. Where did you attend medical school?
I attended medical school in Poland at the Karol Marcinkowski University of Sciences.
And
Cool.
after finishing your medical degree in Poland, what sort of residency did you participate in?
I completed a 4-year residency in anatomic and clinical pathology at the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Where did you work after that?
After that, I completed a 1-year fellowship, specifically training in forensic pathology with the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And have you worked anywhere else as a medical examiner?
I have.
Where would that be?
I worked in Milwaukee for 5 years and as an assistant medical examiner before coming to Dane County.
And how long have you worked in Dane County?
I began my employment in Dane County in 2015.
And what is your current title?
I am currently the Chief Medical Examiner of Dane County, serving Brock, Brown, Door, and Oconto counties.
And what does a medical examiner do?
Essentially, the role of a forensic pathologist who serves as a medical examiner in a county is to determine the cause and the manner of death in cases that are reported to our office. We don't have to investigate every death that happens in our jurisdictions. However, there are some cases that are not natural deaths, or we don't have a cause of death, or they might be suspicious or violent deaths. In those cases, it's the job of the forensic pathologist or the medical examiner to determine what the exact cause of death is, what the manner is, and to make sure that the death certification is appropriately completed. Also to ensure that an autopsy is performed or some form of examination, if needed, to document the cause of death and to make it available for purposes of the court.
And are you board certified in any areas?
I am board certified in anatomic and forensic pathology.
Okay, and what does it mean to be board certified?
Board certification is essentially an exam that allows you, it essentially says that you meet the bare minimum criteria for your profession. You have to complete residency training before you can take an exam, and then you take it to say that you have a minimal amount of knowledge by the board that governs your field. The same thing for forensic pathology. It basically means not only did you complete the training course, but you have the requisite knowledge to practice independently in that field.
And approximately how many autopsies have you performed during your career?
I did the numbers a few days ago, and actually somewhere around 4,000, a little over 4,000.
And part of your practice is to write a report in each case?
Yes, in most cases.
Okay. And did you write a report in the case of Krista Halderson?
I did.
I'm now going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 368.
Thank you.
How would you identify exhibit 368?
This is part of the medical examiner file on this case. It includes my autopsy report, or a copy of my autopsy report, as well as a copy of our investigative report. This would be written, comprised by our investigators in the course of their work on this case.
In association with this case, did you put together a presentation based on your report?
I did.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as exhibit 370. I also have a USB of it 369. Could you please look through exhibit 370 and tell me if that is the presentation you prepared?
It appears to be, yes.
This time the state would move exhibits 368 through 370 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
They are received.
And as we've done in this trial, could you please compare, this is an example copy that the jury will get. Will you please compare your 370 to a jury copy?
Yes.
As the witness is going through that process, ladies and gentlemen, I'll advise you that once again, it'll be necessary in this case for the state to utilize exhibits so that you understand the testimony and the evidence. That'll be done through the booklet format. Once again, the pages are numbered in the bottom right-hand corner as before, and your obligation as before is to at least observe the exhibits one by one. To the extent you do so is up to your own decision-making as jurors. Thank you.
I can flip through one if that's easier.
Sorry.
And actually, as before, I'll remind you to only turn pages in the booklet as the exhibit is being shown during the testimony, although you can go backwards if you wish at any point without losing your place, I hope.
And those appear to be exact copies of each other.
They do.
And now I'm going to pass out exhibit 370. Doctor, I've left exhibit 368, your medical report up there. If you need to refer to it at any time, that's fine, but the court would ask that you just note it for the record.
Thank you.
Counsel, I think we have an extra.
Yep. Fabulous. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Doctor, could you please turn to slide 2 in your presentation? On July 14th of 2021, were you called out to a location in Roxbury, DNR land?
I was.
And what was the purpose of you being called out there?
Human remains or suspected human remains have been found in this area. It's our policy in the office to respond to a potential homicide or potential human remains because we had already found other human remains that were confirmed as human. The doctor and myself responded to the scene as well, rather than just an investigator initially.
And what is the jury looking at on slide 2?
On slide 2, the jury is just looking at a photograph of the scene and the parkway. This is part of the trail through which we went in order to get to those remains.
Let's turn to slide 3. What is the jury looking at with slide 3?
Here you're looking again at the scene. We've moved a little bit further away from the parking lot. I believe that in the left hand of the photograph is part of the river or the river bed. And we were walking across this to go further into an open area of the parkway.
And how would you describe this area in general? Was it remote? Were there a lot of people around? Something else?
At the time that I was there, there weren't a lot of people around other than sheriff's deputies. There was a parking lot and a small area of, I'm not sure if they were camper units or small cabins off of the parking lot. I'm not sure if those were residences or just temporary camping sites, but a handful of domestic kind of units. There was the parking lot, and the rest of it is, as you see in the photographs, essentially just forest, trees, and prairie.
All right, and turning to slide 4, how would you describe slide 4?
Slide 4 is again on our way to the scene. This is where the forest opens up into a kind of prairie. One photograph wouldn't capture the entirety of it, but this is just the pathway that we were taking to get to the remains. You can see that this is an open field at this point.
It's a little bit hard to tell from slide 4, but how high was the grass or the weeds in that prairie area?
I don't recall that we took a measurement, but I would say that they're probably calf length. They weren't knee length, and there was a path already built, so we weren't struggling.
Okay. Could you please describe slide 5?
On slide 5, we've moved through a portion of the prairie, and we're now edging into the area where the remains were found. You can almost see a few of the bushes or a large tree in the middle of the photograph that seem to be a little bit closer to the prairie. We're actually going to be moving behind that area, which is where the remains were found.
In slide 6, could you describe that slide?
In slide 6, we're actually coming to the edge of that prairie. We've walked past that large tree that you saw in slide 5, and you're seeing a portion of that large tree. In the middle of the photograph, you can't see from this distance, but for orientation purposes, this is where the remains are found.
Okay. Could you please describe picture 7 for the jury?
Yes. In picture 7, we've moved a little bit closer to that area where the remains are found. You'll note that there are red and blue circles on this photograph, and there are notes on the right side of this presentation, so you can orient yourself. Within the right circle, underneath the tree on the left side of the photograph, you can see this is where we'll find the remains of the left thigh, a left foot, and a right leg. And identified in the blue circle under a smaller bush a little further away is the left knee. Identified here as the left leg.
In your identification, you have left thigh, comma, left foot, comma, right leg. Was the thigh dismembered from the foot, or the foot dismembered from the thigh?
Yes, what ultimately I believe to be the left thigh that joins that, the left knee that joins the left thigh and that left leg was identified in the area here circled in blue. So the right leg is intact from the thigh down. The left leg was fragmented. A portion was found in one area, the knee, the thigh, and the foot were found with the right leg.
And let's turn to slide 8. How would you describe slide 8 for the jury?
Slide 8 is now a close-up photograph of what we're seeing in the underbrush. This is still far enough away that you can't identify it, but as you were walking into the scene, you would see a fragment of dried brown parchment-like skin, and these remains correspond to the left thigh, the left foot, and the right leg, and they're identified with a yellow circle on your notes.
And as you're approaching these body parts, what if anything, are you looking to sort of take in and observe?
From the perspective of a forensic pathologist, what I'm looking for initially are how many remains there are. First of all, I want to make sure I'm not screwing anything up in the pathway for those people who are qualified to look at the tracks and the scene, the law enforcement officers. But my main concern looking at the remains is to see if they are covered, are they buried? Do they appear to be intact? Do they even appear to be human remains? Is there insect activity? Is there animal activity? These are the things that I'm thinking about. Most of it I won't know until I get really close, but that's what I'm thinking about as I'm approaching this kind of scene.
And how would you describe slide 9?
So slide 9 is a photograph from the same position where I took the photograph in slide 8 from. This gives you some perspective as to the distance between the two piles of remains. So identified in the red circle is actually the left knee, identified here as left thigh, but it's actually a portion of the left thigh and that left knee and the left leg, that missing portion between the thigh and the foot that we saw in the other, identified in the other picture. So you can see that there's some distance between these two piles of remains. Here, this knee is actually visible, it's open, it's between some very thin, I believe they're called, they're not twigs, they're just saplings. Basically in a relatively open area in comparison to the rest.
And could you tell from your observations of being there whether or not it was purposely placed in a separate area or if it was later on by wildlife or something else? Is that something you could determine?
Well, purposely placed in the sense that these fragments had no reason to be there of their own accord. So the distance between them would not be accounted by any grade in the terrain. So it's not like it rolled down a hill. There was a slight a grade to it, but there was so much brush and shrubbery that it would not have, it would have stopped. There was no animal activity that I could discern on either the soft tissue or the bone. I would defer that to the anthropologist if there is any animal activity that I didn't recognize. There was no definitive explanation for the difference in the distance between them.
And what do you observe on picture 10?
So on picture 10, you're actually seeing my right foot, unfortunately in the field of the photograph, but in the center of the photograph, what you can see are these remains that were identified as the right leg, left thigh, and left foot. Now we're looking at them with a bird's eye view on top as opposed to through the brush. The brush hasn't been cleared, so this is exactly how these remains were found in the open. You can see that the skin is really dried and brown. It's called parchment-like. It's starting to mummify. You can see all of the gray little fragments that look like little pellets or rice grains. Those are actually maggots that are essentially starting to work on decomposing the body. And you can see that there's just grass around the area without any major coverage. There's nothing on top of these remains.
And doctor, I noticed
So you just throw 'em out
looking
there
at your
like
foot that you appear to be wearing booties. Could you please describe how you are, or what attire or safety precautions you take when approaching human remains?
Anytime we approach a scene, we want to make sure that we're not tracking any evidence or DNA into the field. We're going to be handling this material, so it's even more important for us to be protected. We usually don a Tyvek suit, which is a full, essentially a bunny suit or footed pajamas, if you like, with a hood. We'll wear masks and gloves and eye protection. This is to keep our DNA or our person from being deposited on the remains or a body if we're looking at a homicide scene of a different kind.
And could you describe slide 11, please?
So in slide 11, now we are looking at a close-up view of the left knee that was found a little bit further away. You can see again that gray discoloration and some of those white fragments that are the maggots that are part of the decomposition process and the insect activity. You can see a fragment of exposed bone looking straight at the camera. And you can see that the skin here is a little bit different color. It is starting to putrefy a little bit. It is starting to dry a little bit, but it isn't as parchment-like or as mummified as the other remains.
And at some point, are these remains collected and taken back to your offices?
Yes, they are.
How are those remains collected?
We collected them in separate body bags just to keep the fragments separated until we can officially identify them. And just by looking at them with the naked eye like this, you can't really tell if they're from the same person. So we collected them as separate pieces. We placed them into a body bag. That body bag is zip closed. The remains are actually, before it's zip closed, placed into what's known as an evidence sheet. So it's a clean white sheet that covers those remains. Anything that would fall off would go into that evidence sheet. Then we place that into a white body bag, close it. We tie it with a zip tie with a numbered tag, and then we document that tag number and the time it was sealed, as well as by whom, and that is tracked throughout the rest of the autopsy and examinations that follow.
All right, and could you please describe what you observe in slide 12?
So in slide number 12, we've moved forward to the 16th of July. We are now in the autopsy suite. The remains have been placed on a blue sheet for the purpose of documentation and photographs. What we're looking at specifically on slide number 12 is a photograph of the right leg. In the corner, you'll see an L-shaped ruler. That's there for a couple of purposes. One, that gray ruler on the side actually has our medical examiner case number. That tells you the case number, and that gray fragmented ruler is also about 2 inches long, so that if you want to do some measurements for your own purposes, you know that's about how big that is. So here we can see the parchment-like dried, partially mummified right lower extremity, or the right leg. You can see a fragment of skin that's attached to the side of that foot. You can see a fragment of the thigh in the upper corner, and we'll talk about that in a different slide.
And in examining the foot, were you able to estimate a shoe size?
I was able to get a measurement of the length of that foot, and it's 7.5 inches from toe to heel. Using just a Google search to find a scale for measuring shoe sizes, We came up with a shoe size of about 8. However, it must be remembered that the foot is partially mummified and desiccated. So this is not a definitive measurement. I can say that it's 7.5 inches from the longest toe to the heel.
Please describe what the jury is looking at in slide 13, please.
In slide 13, you're looking at the cut end of the skin of the right leg. What I'm showing here is that the thigh has relatively clean cuts along the edge of the skin with a couple of triangular, what are known as skin tags. One of the ways to distinguish a sharp force injury that's incurred by a sharp implement, such as glass, a knife, pair of scissors, is that the edge is going to be clean and relatively able to be put together. A blunt trauma that breaks skin, what's known as a laceration. So let's say that it's a fall and somebody tears that skin apart. That skin becomes very jagged and irregular. There's usually some scraping of the skin on the outside, and that helps us distinguish these two. The features that we're seeing here are relatively clean incisions. So this was done by a sharp object. The irregular fragments, those skin tags that are outlined by some of the red arrows, those are telling us that there's motion. This wasn't just a clean cut that went all the way around. This was a cut and a stop, and either the weapon is removed and put back in, which is what usually happens if you think about cutting something that's the length of a thigh. The sharp implement goes in and out, and every time it does, it doesn't go back in exactly into the same place. So you end up with a little bit of a skin tag. And this is also very characteristic of a sharp force injury.
And just for the record, your hand kind of made what I would describe as a sawing motion as you explained that. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yes. Basically, I was demonstrating a sharp implement moving in and out as it's being either going across or into the object that it's cutting.
Doctor, what is the jury going to be seeing here in slide 14?
In slide 14, we're seeing that the bone here on the femur has been cut. So now we're looking at the bone, or that leg flipped over to the other side.
And what, if anything, can you tell us about this cut?
The most important thing has been outlined by the red arrow. It's a little bit hard to see because even though on the outside the tissue is brown and mummified, when we flip it over on the inside, everything looks gray. That's because it's essentially putrefying and it changes to that gray homogeneous color. But the red arrow is pointing to where the femur ends. That's the bone of the thigh. And you can see that this bone is also relatively smooth with a cut end. It doesn't look like if you think of a chicken bone that you break, for example, you can see that it has splinters or jagged edges on the sides. Here we can see that that bone is relatively smooth and cut off in a diagonal.
And are you at all able to tell what sort of instrument created this cut, or is that for the forensic anthropologist?
I can say that there are definitely tool marks present, but I think the forensic anthropologist is in a better position with much more precise measurements to give the jury a sense of what type of tools might have been used.
All right, thank you. What do you observe on slide 15?
So on slide 15, we're again looking at the right leg, and now we're looking at the back. This is the popliteal fossa, or that little area behind your knee. And within that area is a single kind of a teardrop-shaped defect. It's circled in a yellow circle on your slide.
And what would cause something like that?
There are multiple explanations. The first one being that it's possible insect activity. However, as you may have seen in a previous presentation, and even on these photographs, you might note as well, the little holes that are associated with maggot activity called burr holes tend to be very small and round. They're usually just a few millimeters or fractions of an inch wide. This is a relatively large hole. It has characteristics that are similar to a stab wound. On one end, closest to that gray part of the ruler that has our medical examiner number, you can see that the end is pointed, but the opposite side is blunt. Now, with the amount of damage to the tissue and putrefaction, I can't say definitively that this is a stab wound, but it is suspicious for an injury with a sharp force injury, such as a single-edged knife.
Thank you. What are we looking at in slide 16?
In slide 16, we're actually looking at that same right leg, but now we've cut into the skin and we've moved it open. We sort of dissected it and splayed that soft tissue open. You can see that from the edge of the femur to the foot, the bone is intact. The muscle inside is putrefied. It's brown and yellow. But the interesting thing about it is that, except in the areas of insect activity at the edges, there is no blood. There is no hemorrhage. There's no area here that says that there was blood flow at the time any of these injuries were incurred.
So doctor, are you saying that the
That's
person
good.
was dead at the time that the leg was removed from the body?
Most likely, yes.
And are there any signs that these wounds were, actually strike that. Are there any other signs that you're able to detect that suggest that this was done post-mortem or after death?
The majority of the findings, if it was done antemortem, if there was blood flow to this leg, we would be seeing some hemorrhage. I examined this under the microscope as well. Sometimes we might see red blood cells that are associated, even if I can't identify them as such with the naked eye. There was no indication here of blood flow. The tissue, even though it's decomposed, would still have a darker color if there was blood, and there isn't any. That's the main factor that says that there was no movement and no flow of blood, and likely this was post-mortem.
Turning to slide 17, what is the jury observing here?
In slide 17, you're looking at a couple of things. Mainly, you're looking at the left foot on the side, and that's identified by that L-shaped ruler. In the circles, the two red circles, you're also seeing fragments of skin that were recovered with this tissue. If you recall, the intact tissue of the right leg had a fragment of skin on it. That is that layer of skin on the bottom of your foot. These both also have ridges on them that are characteristic with either a foot or a palm. One of them was still attached to the foot, and you could see the ridges. The one on the right leg still had circular ridges that were consistent with the ball of the foot where it was attached. Two fragments similar to this, the squamous epithelium had ridges that were consistent with the heel, and there was another fragment that had a ridge pattern consistent with the ball of the foot that was not attached to anything and was associated with this left foot.
Thank you. Turning to slide 18. Please describe slide 18 to the jury.
In slide 18, you're looking at the foot, but at the cut end. So now the sole of the foot is on the table, and you're basically looking down at the cut edge of the bone. Identified with the red arrows, you can essentially see what we talked about. The skin there is a nice smooth incision. It's basically a very smooth linear cut edge all the way around. You can see that the bone also is relatively smooth. However, you can also see identified by the green arrows that there appear to be kind of steps in the bone. Again, this is consistent with a sharp force injury that can be sawing or some sort of cutting, but again, we have movement and we have a ridge. It's not just cut clean through. At the very end, it almost looks as if there's a possibility that it was broken. Again, I would defer that to the forensic anthropologist about the very details of it. But from my perspective, I can see that the bone is being cut, and at some point the cuts are irregular and they're making little steps. And also there may be some breakage of the bone as well
Perhaps
towards the
with
end.
an axe.
Turning to slide 19. Why did you take picture 19?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. What is picture 19? I said, why did you take picture 19, or what does it represent?
Picture 19. That's why she didn't understand
so
what
picture
you
19
asked.
is that same left foot. Now we're looking at it from the side. We're looking at the outside of the ankle. And you can see identified by the red arrows, the same sort of skin tags that we saw on the thigh. Again, we're looking at incisions, a cut that's being made around the ankle or the distal leg portion. And anytime that there's a movement in that sharp tool,
Oh, I don't like where the
either in
mic
or
is
out
now
or forward
either.
and backwards, we're seeing a small skin tag being
Don't
made.
like
And we
the
see
way
that
it's
continuing
set up.
here on the foot as well.
And
Gonna have
doctor,
to
this is
move
a
it
small
again.
point, but there appear to be some twigs kind of stuck to that foot. Could you tell us about that?
I think those are just fragments from the scene. Again, if you remember, it was laid in that field, and that had some small short grasses, some dried grasses there. This was the best photograph that I had of these edges, but it's probably one of the earlier photographs before we removed some of the debris that was attached.
Sure. All right. What does slide 20 show us?
Slide 20, again, is showing the reflection of the skin. We tried to get as much off to look at the muscle underneath. Again, we're seeing that gray change associated with putrefaction, but we're not seeing any hemorrhage or any discoloration to indicate that there was blood flow at the time these injuries were incurred.
Again, suggesting it's postmortem.
Correct.
Turning to slide 21. What does slide 21 show you?
In slide 21, we're looking at the left thigh. The white arrows in the middle are identifying the types of holes that we see from maggot activity. We see this very commonly in mummified remains, and you can actually see them in museum exhibits if you're ever looking at a mummy. These are these nice small round holes that a maggot makes in order to get into the tissue or to get back out. In contrast to that, in the red arrows on the side,
I
again,
don't
we're looking
like
at
the words
incisions
you
or
are
sharp force
using,
injuries on the
ma'am.
skin. You can see the cuts are very broad and very jagged. You'll see them on both sides of the picture and also both sides of the cut ends of the thigh, excuse me. So you can see cut ends on the distal portion as well as the proximal portion. Again, sharp incisions with skin tags. Inside the red circle, you're looking at the bone, the femur, and you can see that it also has a partially smooth edge, but now it's also making a jagged point, suggesting that we have both sharp and blunt force injuries involved.
Turning to slide 22. What is the jury observing in slide 22?
In slide 22, we're again looking at the left thigh, but now we're looking at a close-up of the bone. And the yellow arrow is showing us a nice smooth edge. Again, this is where the bone is being cut. But the red arrows are showing that we have jagged ends in part of the cortex, or the kind of circular rim, the hard part of the bone. And that is indicative of a blunt force injury, meaning not something that's done with a knife, but it could be either done with a different tool or it could be broken.
What does picture 23 show us?
In picture 23, we're looking straight down into that bone. Normally, when you would look down at bone, you would see a nice circular rim, which is the hard cortex, and inside is the medulla, the soft part where blood cells are made. But within that red circle inside of the marrow, what you actually see a fragment of bone. So this indicates that not only was this bone cut, as we've already seen in other photographs, but it confirms the fact that there was blunt trauma as well, because now a broken fragment of bone is actually tightly jammed into the marrow.
All right, turning to slide 24. What are we observing on slide 24?
On slide 24, we're looking at a very close-up view of the thigh and the bones from the left extremity. The green arrow is again showing us those nice, relatively smooth cut edges. They do have some irregularity to it, but in comparison to those identified by the red arrow, where we have peaks and valleys up and down, the green arrow is showing us sharp force injuries. The red arrows are showing us fragmented bone, so likely blunt force trauma or breakage of the bone. And in the middle of the photograph in the white box, you can see that you have linear cuts on the bone. So these linear incisions are essentially sharp force injuries or cuts that are made on the bone, most likely as the soft tissue or the skin is being cut.
Turning to picture 25. What does picture 25 illustrate?
So in picture 25, again, we've reflected all of the soft tissue of the bone. So you can see the bone in the middle, and on both sides of the bone is slightly gray, yellow, putrefied muscle and soft tissue. Again, there's no hemorrhage, there's no darkening areas that are consistent with a previous hemorrhage. So there's no evidence of blood flow at the time that these injuries were incurred.
Turning to slide 26. Could you please describe slide 26?
Yes. On slide 26, now we're looking at the left knee that was recovered separately. The white arrows are pointing toward the femur. So that's the leg part, the thigh part. And the double arrows in yellow are showing the tibia and the fibula of the leg.
Turning to slide 27. What do we observe there?
There, now you can't
Here on slide
see
27,
the
we are
whole
looking at the
thing.
distal or the far portion of the leg where the tibia and fibula are. What you're seeing identified by the white arrows is the edge of the skin, and you can see a very nice smooth cut all the way around. There are a few areas where it's jagged with those triangular skin tags or maybe some steps in the skin, but for the most part, it's a smooth cut all the way on this side.
Doctors, the cuts, some of them have been really smooth, some of them have been more jagged. What would account for that?
Many different things would account for it. It could be the result of using different tools. It could be the result of somebody being tired. It could be the result of different condition of the tissue. And essentially, they're indicators of motion. So it basically means that the sharp object is moving either back and forth or in and out in a stab wound. Every time we have one of those irregularities, you know that the knife has come in a different direction, or the glass or whatever sharp implement you're using. In cases where we're seeing such vast differences, it could be either because of a difference in the condition of the tissue. We know that this left knee, for example, isn't as decomposed as the left thigh, the left foot, and the right leg. If it's mummified, the skin will be tougher and there might require a different force. And again, if a different tool is being used, that could account for it.
I don't
as
think
well.
it was mummified
Why
when
would
he
some
cut
of
him
the
up.
body parts be more mummified than others? What could account for that?
Again, different conditions under which they were either stored or they were placed outside. A more shaded area is going to provide cooler air, maybe more moist air. That kind of tissue, if it's cooler, may not putrefy as quickly and it may not mummify. You need relatively dry, hot air for the mummification process to occur. There are also other factors that could be happening before they are, in this case, before they were placed into the park. Portions may have been kept refrigerated or frozen, or they may have been kept in a cooler place. There are many factors that go into it, so I can't say just one, but I can tell you if one is consistent.
Okay, thank you. Turning
Possibly
to slide
kept in a
28.
freezer,
What is significant about slide
a
28?
small deep freezer that they found during COVID.
On slide 28, we're looking at the left knee again, and we're looking at the femur. So in the big white square in the middle, you can see again those kind of linear horizontal cuts on the bone. Those can be as a result of either
Perhaps.
cutting away the soft tissue or initial attempts at cuts that just didn't go all the way through.
Shit balls.
The red arrows are
Yeah.
identifying the jagged edges of the bone. Again, this is
Oh,
indicative of
we're
bone
looking
trauma,
The camera
fracture,
again.
or a blow with a heavy object.
Turning to slide 29. What does slide 29 demonstrate?
Who
So slide
fucking
29 is
knows?
demonstrating, again, that right knee, but now we're looking at it kind of upside down. So what we're looking at are the tibia and the fibula. So those would normally be the bottom parts of your leg, but we've turned them upside down for photographs. And just like we've seen in the other tissue, we're seeing both the smooth edge as it's cut. You can see that it's almost a flat end, right? And that's demonstrated by the red arrows. But the green arrow is showing you a step or an irregularity, in the way that that bone is cut. So we're seeing some evidence of a sharp force that's not clean all the way through, but kind of jagged cuts on top of the bone. And again, I'm using my left hand to make kind of a sawing motion to demonstrate the movement.
Thank you. What is shown in slide 30?
In slide 30, now we have reflected the skin from that knee. You can see that this looks very different from the remainder of the tissue. On the outside, it wasn't as parchment-like, it wasn't as dried, and you can also see here that the fat has stayed yellow as it would, and that the muscle is pink. So this bone and muscle tissue and soft tissue is better preserved than that right leg, left thigh, and left foot. Again, there's no hemorrhage here either. Even though we have very good soft tissue, we don't have a lot of putrefaction and no artifact. There's absolutely no hemorrhage here.
In slide 31. What are we observing in slide 31?
In slide 31, we have removed all of the soft tissue from the bone. And at this point, before we involve the anthropologist and before the bones are prepared for that examination, I'm just putting together the bones of the left thigh and the left knee. You can see, identified by the L-shaped ruler, you can actually see the linear, irregular kind of line across the bone. That is where the end of the left thigh and the end of the femur of the knee are put back together, and that they approximate very nicely. They come right back together like pieces of a puzzle.
So does that suggest that
So the other lady could have done that.
they were at one point the full leg?
To me, yes, this indicates that these pieces of bone are from the same leg.
And turning to your
Fitting.
last slide, what is slide 32 showing?
The other
us?
lady could have done that. That could have been her job.
Slide 32 is that same process. Remove the bone from the distal portion or the entire knee, and I put that left foot and the left leg back together. You can see that the large bone right in the front of the photograph has a bit of a gap. That's just a piece of tissue that's gone, and that bone that's gone and not going to be recovered, probably because of the tool that was used to separate them. But those pieces do come together. And to the left of that, you can see the fibula, and you can see how those two pieces of bone come nicely together.
Again, fitting them like puzzle pieces, demonstrating that they're of the same leg.
Yes.
Now, doctor, you have a name on your report of who you believed these legs belong to, Krista Halderson. Is that correct?
Correct.
How did you come to identify that these legs belong to Krista Halderson?
We collected DNA samples from the fragments of tissue. The tissue from the left knee that was pink was still viable for DNA analysis. And the crime laboratory made a comparison and identified the remains as that of Krista R. Halderson.
And doctor, in doing your autopsy of these legs, were you able to determine a cause of death?
Not specifically, no.
What, if anything, were you able to report?
Well, I do know that there are sharp force injuries, and I do see that there are blunt force injuries. But again, as we've already mentioned, these are post-mortem. So I don't actually know what injury caused the death of Krista Halderson. But I believe that she died as a result of some violence, a non-natural death. And the cause of death is described as homicidal violence.
And that would be the manner of death.
The manner of death is homicide.
But again, you don't know the specifics. She could have been shot, strangled. You have no information to determine.
We don't
That's
know
correct.
because we
don't
only have a
anything
leg
other than
and
the legs to make
feet
that determination.
or foot.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning.
Just a couple questions for you. We had looked at page 15, if you don't mind turning to page 15. I believe it was the knee, and there was a defect that you spent some time talking about. As far as that defect goes, I believe you mentioned that it could be some type of stabbing, correct?
Sharp force injury, yep.
And just to confirm, that defect happened post-mortem as well? Yes?
Correct. If it is a stab wound or an incision, it is post-mortem as well.
Now, bringing your attention to the cause of death, you had mentioned that you can't specify what exactly the cause of death is, correct?
Correct.
And when we're talking about cause of death, we're talking about, as Attorney Raymond said, gunshot wounds, stabbing, strangling, something along those lines, correct?
Correct.
Now, when we're talking about the manner of death being homicide, how is it that you determined that it was a homicide?
Well, she didn't cut her fucking
It's
self
the
up.
Totality of the event. It's the fact that we have a pair of
What kind
legs
of
that are
question is
separated
that?
from the
You
head,
think you're
the torso,
putting-
and it's
You think you're
related
putting
extremities.
reasonable
The fact that
doubt
these
in
remains have
somebody's
been,
mind? That's not reasonable.
dismembered from an individual postmortem, that there is an attempt to hide these remains. And it's also in conjunction with what we know about the death of Bart Halderson. We believe that this all occurred at relatively the same time under the same circumstances.
So it sounds like you're using a lot of different factors other than just the legs in and of themselves to determine that homicide was a manner of death.
Yes, although I will say that I have no explanation for why these two legs would be found in a state park in the course of a natural death. There's no way that I could call this anything natural. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so let me see if I can kind of understand that. The fact that the legs were found where they were is something that you use to determine a homicide versus a natural death.
It's part of what we use to determine the manner as a homicide, yes.
And I
What
guess that
natural
ultimately
death
is
do
the
you
issue.
know
You
of
just have a pair of legs.
that
You
indicates
can't really determine much from the legs in and of itself.
that the legs
I can
were
determine
chopped
that,
or
the
cut
dismemberment
off?
occurred. They didn't fall off. They were actually taken off the body. I can determine
Thank
that
you,
we have
ma'am.
different types of injuries. We have sharp force injuries and blunt force injuries. I can also determine that this happened post-mortem. So there are a few things that I can
Exactly.
determine, but you're correct that there's a limit to what I can say.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any redirect?
Yeah,
One
no, you
follow-up
don't,
question. So,
dumbass.
doctor, is it fair to say that your determination is based on the
Stupid
totality
fucking questions.
of all of the evidence that you know at the time and not just a decision
God.
made in a vacuum?
That's correct.
All right,
Does
thank
she
you.
just
Nothing
sit
further.
there?
I actually
Did
have a
she just sit
clarification
there?
question, doctor, and it has to do with both the use of the term and the description of movement that you've made reference sawing. You're testifying about that movement or that style of motion and not about whatever implement was used at the time of that motion. Is that correct?
That is correct. As a forensic pathologist, my ability to determine tool marks is limited. However, we know
The way the
forensically that when
skin
we see those kinds
looks.
of skin tags, that is usually the result of a motion of a sharp object, either a sawing or a stabbing motion.
Thank you. Any questions in a follow-up to my question
No, Your Honor.
from
No,
defense?
no, thank you.
May this witness be excused
She may.
and released?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I'll take the exhibits that are there with you.
He is so nice. He is such a pleasant judge.
Let me inquire of the jury whether they'd like to take a break at this point or proceed. Does anybody feel a need to take a break? We've been here an hour, but it's been an hour with a lot of information. I see nobody looking like they need a break. So we'll go ahead and invite the next witness to be called.
Proceed, judge.
All right, the state is gonna call Deputy Will next.
I seriously wonder if she just thinks I am so smart or I am just the dumbest piece of shit ever. Like, what is wrong with you, lady? Like, those were the.
Good morning.
Morning.
If you believe you've
How
been
do you
safely
know
and
this was a
responsibly testified without
homicide?
mask, thank you so much.
You
Well,
bet.
she
Cindy
didn't
Raymond.
fucking cut her own legs
Deputy Mayor,
off.
you've testified once before, but could you please restate both your first and last name
Jesus.
for the record?
Yes, my first name is Michael, Michael. Last name is Wilk, Wilk.
And just to remind the jury, part of the duties in your particular role is occasionally to
I'm not gonna do it.
view video and help Scott Coons with analysis.
Yes, that is correct.
And I'm going to approach you with Exhibit 568.
Oh, you're gonna approach
Now,
him.
one of the videos that you painstakingly watched in this case was from the Bridgman property. I think it's 522 Bridgman from July 6th of 2021.
Correct. 7022 Bridgman.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And in the course, I would like you to look at Exhibit 568. And would a fair description of 568 be still shots from the Richmond video on July 6th, 2021?
Yes, that is correct.
And specifically the early morning hours from 12:01 a.m. to about 4:30.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, those appear to be true and accurate images or screenshots.
Yes, they do.
At this point, I would move Exhibit 568 into evidence.
No objection.
Thank you. It is received.
And if I could have the left HDMI, Your Honor.
And specifically in watching this video, you detailed or listed every time you observed a light in one of the corresponding windows. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that is correct.
And specifically at the Halderson home.
Yes, the north side of the residence.
It sounds like law talk with Mike.
And slide 2, that is at 12:07 a.m.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And slide 3 is just with a circle. What are we observing in slide 3?
Yes, on slide 3, you can see a low light
Dark.
level emanating from what has been labeled and described as the fireplace window.
And moving now to 12:11 a.m., what are we observing on slide 5?
On slide 5, on the west side of the residence is a window attached to the garage of the residence, and you can see a low light source emanating from that window.
And slide 6 is 12:16 a.m. What are we observing in slide 6?
In slide 6, again,
Why
we
are we
are
going back to this?
observing a low light level, slightly more intense than the initial image of a light source emanating from that fireplace window.
And again, this is also based on your analysis with Scott Coons, and we watched a video of the July 1st going into July 2nd previous.
Yes, correct. I was present and assisted with that analysis the evening that we conducted it. I also have had the opportunity to review his report.
Slide 7 is at 12:23 a.m. Light source appears to have gone away.
Yes, that is correct. There's no observable light source at this time.
12:33 a.m. What are we observing in slide 10?
In slide 10, we can see light source emanating at this time from the kitchen window, which also with a lower light level emanating from what would be the dining room window.
And then 12:35 a.m.
There's no observable light sources at this time.
1:18 a.m.
We're again seeing a low light source emanating from the fireplace window.
1:18 a.m.
The light source is now dissipated and there's no observable light source at this time.
1:27 a.m.
Again, we're seeing a light source emanating from a window located on the west side of the residence, which was associated with a garage.
1:40 a.m.
How can you
No
tell?
observable light source.
2:15 a.m.
Again, we have another light source coming from the west side of the residence with a window associated with the garage.
2:20 a.m.
No observable light source at this time.
3:43 a.m.
Again, we're seeing an observable light source coming from the garage window.
3:48 a.m.
No observable light source at this time.
3:52 a.m.
Again, we're seeing another light source coming from the garage window.
3:57 a.m.
No observable light source at this time.
4:03 a.m.
403, we're seeing another light source emanating from the garage window.
4:09 a.m.
No observable
What the
light
hell
source
is he
at this time.
doing?
4:25 a.m.
Oh,
Again, we're
he's
seeing
going
another
back
light
and
source
forth
emanating from the garage window.
to get tools
4:30 a.m.
and
No observable light source.
4:31 a.m.
different items.
At this time, we're seeing another
low-level light source coming from the garage window. We also have, it's not circled in this image, but we have a light source now slightly to what would be south of that window coming from the driveway area of the residence.
And then 4:31 and 24 seconds a.m.
At this time, we're observing automobile leaving the residence. You have both in the upper right-hand corner of the image, video still from the 111 Oak Springs Circle residence video surveillance system that shows that vehicle leaving, which was the light source that we initially saw in the previous image.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, you have seen, is it Detective or
She's a
Deputy
little less
Jones's,
dumb.
light
and not
analysis
much.
from the night of July 1st, correct?
I'm having a slightly difficult time hearing you. If you could
Sure.
maybe use the
The
microphone, that'd be great.
fans turned on.
Yeah, the fan
Yeah.
is above my head here. Thank you.
You've seen, I don't know if it's Detective or Deputy Kuntz, you've seen his light source analysis from the July 1st Bridgman Road footage, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, is it fair to say that the light you saw in the video from July 6th was not of the intensity of the theorized fireplace light, correct?
Correct. There were varying levels of intensity from the night of July 2nd, as well as the night of July 6th. There were, or I would guess would be the early morning hours of July 6th. There was also a slight varying level of intensity, however, not quite as intense in times as the night of, or the early morning hours of July 2nd.
And for the July 6th video, Deputy Kuntz didn't do that level of light analysis, correct?
Can you rephrase your question?
Yes, from the July 6th video that these slides are the subject of, Deputy Kuntz did not do the same type of in-depth analysis that he did for the July 1st video.
The video, in essence, would be the same video. It's the same view. It's the same perspective. Nothing necessarily changes in regards to what lights come from what windows that were identified during that light analysis.
Well, maybe I'll rephrase the question a little. The slides that we see here that you've presented today
Yes.
are the only time you saw lights coming from those windows on that Bridgman Road video on July 6th.
On July 6th, correct. Those are the lights that I documented during that viewing of the video.
So if they're not documented in these slides, you didn't see lights, correct?
Whatever was documented in my report would be associated with what was previewed here in court today.
So are you saying there's things in your report that document lights that aren't reflected in this video presentation or this slide presentation?
No, I'm saying this, what was demonstrated or shown here today mirrors what was documented in my report.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any redirect?
Thank
Any
you.
excused? You still have the exhibit, sir?
I do.
Okay. Very good. All that clerk, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Oh my god. I don't really know. So this was a different night. So he did it July 2nd and July 6th. So he was freezing them. He burnt them up the 2nd and the 6th. So he couldn't get it all done in the one night. So he had to do it in the second night. He had holiday festivities to deal with. That's crazy, man. It's crazy. Crazy. It's crazy. This bitch, listen. This bitch right here. Can you see my layer? This defense attorney, you can't see. There she is. This one right here. Dumb as rocks. I could do a better job lawyering than her. She asked the most stupidest questions I've ever heard in my life of an attorney. Swear to God. Dumb as fuck. That's neither here nor there. Oh, God. Okay. This was not day 7, this was day 8. Because remember, day 7 was just for the judge to say, hey, Chandler got the COVID. So they took a break. And that was that. So this is the first part of day 8. And then we will do oh my gosh, what did I do? I did something. I did something. Guys, I messed up. I goofed. I goofed it. I goofed. I goofed. I goofed. Oh my god. Okay. So, and take that away. That can go to the bottom. Yeah, it can go to the bottom. And then we got day 8. Does the fire examiner lady testify again? Or did we already watch that one and I just have it on here twice? Probably I have it on here twice. Because that is just the type of shit that I do. Anyway. Oh my god. Jessica. Okay. I'm tired, y'all. Okay. So this is day 8. And then we will be on to days and whatever. 9. And then on day 10, they do closing arguments. And then it will be jury instructions. And then it will be the verdict. But if you guys already know what the verdict is, you already know what the verdict is. But you'll have to come back and you'll have to get my reactions on what the verdict is. Because that's the fun part, people. That's the fun part of it all, is to do it together. And watch me sit here and fiddle around with all of the things because I can't sit still. I picked things that I can't sit still while doing. It's complicated. All right, I shall end it here. And farewell. And I bid you adieu. And like, subscribe, comment, share. Do all of those things. Because I'm nice. And you like me. Okay? Pretty please? Okay. I'll see you on the next one. It's been fun. I see you later.